I do appreciate that you approach diet from this omnivore, holistic approach, and that's the same way that I eat. And it's almost becoming a rarity now where someone's actually an omnivore anymore because they're either all in on plants or all in on meat. And like there's less and less people right there in the middle. So if we're thinking about this from a big picture perspective, the goal is to not be obese, maintain body weight, reduce risk and avoid pre-diabetes, diabetes, hypertension, maintain a level of fitness and activity, movement. In terms of diet itself, like for some really key takeaways, I'm sure you could probably pull from like Genius Foods, some of those foods you've identified. What are the items that you recommend people, or the foods you recommend people to get into their diet, which I would assume would naturally eliminate some of these other ultra processed foods that they're already consuming?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll list off a few of the foods that I think are really important, and these are I'll present them in no particular order because I feel like whatever food I say first, people are going to say, "Oh, Max is like saying we need to like base our diet around that food," which isn't the case. But I routinely go to bat for grass-fed, grass-finished red meat. I think red meat's a health food, and I believe this well before I had any kind of relationship with producers of grass-fed, grass-finished meat, which I'm very lucky that I now have that supply me with the kinds of meat that I eat and feed my family. But I mean, it's not controversial that this is one of the most nutrient dense foods that exists. And first of all, we need to stop demonizing any whole food, regardless of your dietary tribe. If you're, if somebody's out there demonizing a whole food in a time when most of the calories that your average person is ingesting comes from ultra processed foods, then I think that person, you're listening to the wrong people.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just crazy, like to demonize any whole food, plant or animal.
I mean, people are afraid to eat anything at this point.
It's wild. Yeah. Those memes on social media where it's like, you hear all these like different fear-mongering voices and then what the person's left with is like a bowl of ice.
Yep.
It's crazy.
But it's true.
Yeah, it is true.
It's true.
And I have empathy for your average consumer. And it comes from both camps. I mean, it comes from now the growing carnivore community who are afraid of broccoli. And then, of course, vegans who've been at it for much longer. So they're actually the pros in that regard. But yeah, so I think red meat is a health food, and it's loaded with nutrients that we know are supportive of brain health: creatine, carnitine, carnosine, choline. Super important. I think eggs are a cognitive multivitamin. Dietary cholesterol has essentially no downside with regards to cardiovascular risk. I mean, there are always going to be exceptions to the rule, but for most people, dietary cholesterol is not a major concern. And eggs have a lot more benefits than they do risk. They're the top source of choline, which is a really important nutrient with regards to brain health. About 90% of adults do not meet the adequate intake for choline on a daily basis. It's really important for pregnant women. It's a really powerful brain nutrient. It provides the backbone precursor molecule to acetylcholine, which is important for learning and memory. And it also helps to form the phospholipid bilayer, which is essentially the membrane that protects our neurons and allows our neurons to communicate with neighboring neurons.
I love good eggs.
Yeah, eggs are amazing.
There's this, we were living in Nashville for 9 months, and we moved back to Texas a few months ago. And the first thing I ordered were these eggs from this local farm called Suretail Creek. They do grass-fed, grass-finished beef, pasture-raised eggs, and then pasture-raised chicken. But the farmer, Sam, actually posts a video of his farm, his chickens, every morning. And it's this big open pasture. The chickens are running everywhere. The eggs are the orangest, most buttery tasting eggs you can ever have in your life. I'll go through cartons of eggs. But I know eggs are just so dense in vitamins and minerals and choline, like you said. Grass-fed meats and eggs are like the staples of my everyday diet. It's like a non-negotiable.
Same. Yeah, I mean, think about it. An egg yolk has to contain a little bit of everything that nature has deemed important to grow a brain. So, I mean, it literally is a cognitive multivitamin.
Yeah, true.
A chicken brain but a brain nonetheless. And so I'm a huge fan. There was a study that just found one study, but linking egg consumption with 50% reduced risk for Alzheimer's disease in a population of about 1,300 people, I believe. Egg consumers compared to non-consumers, so 1 or more eggs per week. And other research has linked increased choline intake also with reduced risk.
Do you ever share this stuff and then people change their diet to just eat, like 80-20 meat all day and then a dozen eggs a day? And I'm sure that's not what you're saying, but it's incorporating these into your diet.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I've gotten many people off of vegan diets, like plant-only diets, and I've had amazing feedback from it. Like, women who have gotten their periods back, who've been on these super restrictive plant-based diets and eating more red meat, more eggs, and they report to me that they've never felt better. They've gotten their periods back and brain fog has lifted. And, I'm not a clinician, so I don't have that. I'll never have that one-to-one patient interaction. But at this point, for a decade now, my books have been out. People have, adopted my work. And so I do get, a fair amount of feedback from people. And yeah, I mean, it's a no-brainer, no pun intended, that these foods are going to be supportive. And like the science demonizing them, the research that people use to make such decisive decisions with their diets and to like take eggs off and beef off the table, it's such weak research. And yet people will use that kind of research to make decisions about the foods that they not just eat themselves, but feed their families. And to me, it's such a tragedy.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
So red meat, eggs, I think are great. But then also, I'm a huge fan of dark leafy greens. I think dark leafy greens are great. I think cruciferous vegetables are awesome. Now, with plants, it's a little bit interesting because people have different tolerances to different plants, right? Like red meat intolerance is incredibly rare. There are certain complications of Lyme disease, like alpha-gal syndrome, for example, where people will become sensitive to consuming red meat. But in general, the consumption of red meat is very well tolerated, provided you have ample, adequate stomach acid and the like. But it's the produce section really where people have these different tolerances and sensitivities and things like that typically. So I don't make a one-size-fits-all dietary recommendation. If you feel better without broccoli, for example, in your diet, then listen to your body. But I will say that people are a lot more adaptable, individually and as a species, as we tend to give ourselves credit for. And for somebody who overnight starts eating a ton of fiber or broccoli because they've heard that broccoli is good for you on a podcast, that's going to lead to digestive discomfort. Like, you've got to titrate your dose of these plant compounds up slowly to let your microbiome adapt and adjust. And, and eventually it's going to be not a problem. But yeah, I think people forget that we're incredibly adaptable as a species. And so they have one bad meal or they eat, from one day to the next, they dramatically increase their fiber intake and they feel bloated and whatever. And they think, oh my God, fiber is the worst thing. But that's just not, you got to slowly increase and stick with it and your body adapts.
Yeah, you go from 0 to a pound of raw broccoli.
Yeah, it's not good.
Do you typically cook down your vegetables or you do them raw?
No, I cook them. I think eating raw here and there, a little bit of diversity, I think that's probably beneficial. Because, for example, one of the compounds in cruciferous vegetables that has been shown to help the body more effectively excrete some of these environmental pollutants, sulforaphane, which you might have heard of. That's created when we chew the broccoli, and it's created due to the uniting of two distinct compounds in the broccoli, which are held in different cellular compartments. So you've got glucosinolates in cruciferous vegetables, and then you've got an enzyme called myrosinase. And when you chew raw broccoli, those two chemicals interact. It's an enzymatic conversion that creates sulforaphane. When you cook cruciferous vegetables, you're essentially destroying myrosinase, which is that enzyme. And so you kind of lose some of that detoxification capability of the cruciferous vegetables.
And does that act as a binder and carries toxins out of the body?
It doesn't carry toxins out of the body. That's what fiber does. Fiber can help do that. It's one of the reasons why we think fiber intake seems to be associated with longevity. Fiber sequesters bile acids. And in those bile acids, you've got lipids, you've got toxins that are released from the liver into the gut. And so fiber actually traps those compounds by way of trapping bile acids, and then we poop them out, which is why, pooping, peeing, and sweating, those are the major routes of detoxification, also breathing to some degree. But that's one of the reasons why fiber is so great, and one of the mechanisms by which we think fiber leads to, lower levels of inflammation, increased lifespan, health span, and the like. But no, sulforaphane works via a different pathway. Sulforaphane is I believe it stimulates the body's NRF2 pathway, which is like this detoxification genetic pathway that upregulates production of glutathione, because it is in a way a toxin. So some of the benefits that we get from plants are due to the ingestion of these hormetic stressors, these what are sometimes referred to as insect, like endogenous pesticides that the plants create. And so they actually stimulate a protective, like a low dose of them stimulates a protective response in the body that causes us to increase production of glutathione and all these other catalase, all these other all these detoxification compounds that our own bodies naturally make. But if you're not feeding yourself the appropriate raw materials, so for example, glycine is rate limiting with regard to glutathione production. So, I think, eating more glycine, eating more collagenous tissue, collagen as a supplement, maybe even, cysteine is also important. And so, so sulforaphane works on a different pathway than fiber. But those are the reasons why I think fruits and vegetables continue to be beneficial from the standpoint of health, especially today.